What's up, people? If you can hear that in the background, that is an annoying motorcycle driving back and forth on my street in my hometown of Lockport, New York for the 4th of July weekend, obviously. Very excited for tonight. As I said today on the Thomas Take, if you have not tuned into my podcast, I posted a couple episodes today. But I wanted to post another UFC prediction video, my second UFC pay-per-view event prediction video, UFC 213. That prediction video has done very well, over 460 views on a standard YouTube license. I don't invest a penny in this channel, and people were tuning into it. So thank you so much for tuning into that. Thank you so much for the comments. This video, this prediction piece, is dedicated to UFC 214. You have John Bones Jones versus Daniel Cormier El Deuce. The second time that these two guys will finally, hopefully, God willing, be fighting heading into July 29th, UFC 214. That is the main event. Daniel Cormier, the UFC light heavyweight champion, finally, at last, getting a chance to take on John Jones in a fight that has been really built up. The animosity is palpable. Everybody knows that this is probably the biggest rivalry inside the sport of MMA right now. DC has defended the belt a couple times while John Jones has, kind of been outside the octagon. Obviously, it's been an impressive, showing for Daniel Cormier. I mean, he did beat Anderson Silva, he did beat Alexander Gustafsson, and he did beat Rumble Johnson. Although I would say John Jones is the much better fighter, and I'll get to that a little bit later. Daniel Cormier has held down the fort as the UFC light heavyweight champion for the foreseeable, present, I should say. Whether he will in the foreseeable future, that remains to be seen. And I think that John Jones is realistically one of the best fighters of all time in any sport, not just MMA or boxing. I think in just combat sports history, he's got to be one of the best fighters of all time. The resume that he has put together versus the who's who, Rampage Jackson, Lyoto Machida, Rashad Evans, really carved up those guys like a Thanksgiving turkey when it was all said and done. Regardless of what you think of him outside the cage, John Jones has done a very, very... he has a very, very impressive resume, and that is something that is not lost on guys like me who are hardcore, diehard fans of the sport. So there's not just John Jones versus DC2 on this card as the main event. The co-main event, which was recently just announced, Tyron Woodley versus Damian Maia for the UFC welterweight title. Winner, apparently, according to Dana White, will be taking on George St. Pierre. I don't know how much weight that holds. It seems like Dana's word is just not reliable anymore. He says that UFC 214 will not be the home of Lawler versus Cerrone, a fight that was meant for UFC 213. That fight is not happening at UFC 213. He said it was going to happen later down the road. He said that it is not going to happen at UFC 214, and guess what? It is. So that is another fight that is on this card, Lawler versus Cerrone. But back to Woodley versus Maia. I'm really excited for this fight. This has been a fight that I've been waiting for a little while, and the hardcore MMA enthusiast in me thinks that this is going to be a much tougher fight than Tyron Woodley thinks it's going to be. Damian Maia is no joke. His grappling pedigree is second to none. He is a fighter that I think really deserves this. He deserves this opportunity. Everybody would agree with me on that. He's been in the UFC for quite some time. I really think he deserves this opportunity, and I'm excited for him. Also, as I mentioned, Robbie Lawler versus Donald Cerrone. I gave my prediction on that fight. I'm going to come right out and say it. I think that Lawler wins that fight. I think Lawler is really pissed off that he lost his title in the fashion that he did, and I think he hits far too hard for Donald Cerrone to be able to, get through a 3-round fight with Robbie Lawler. I don't know if Donald Cerrone can do that. So that's my first prediction. I like to preview the fights and then predict them. Next up, Cristiano Cyborg Santos taking on Tanya Evinger. Her original opponent, Megan Anderson, pulled out of the fight due to personal reasons. This for lack of a better term, is an Invicta super fight. Invicta, the leading women's MMA organization in the wide world of mixed martial arts. Cyborg, a champion at the 145-pound weight class. Evinger, a bantamweight champion, which is a 135-pound weight class in Invicta. And Evinger actually lost to Raquel Pennington on the one of the seasons of the Rousey Tate season of The Ultimate Fighter. So she was very close to getting into the UFC. That did not happen, but this is her big moment, her big chance to get a big victory over a lady like Cristiano Cyborg Santos. Really, she is a real threat to virtually any man or woman that she steps into the octagon. I think that she could beat some of the middleweights in the UFC's men division. She's really impressive. So I'm going to go with Cyborg on that fight. Co-main event, I'm going to go with Damian Maia. And last but not least, I am going with John Bones Jones regaining his title. I think John Jones is DC's kryptonite. I feel like that happens a lot in the sport of MMA and boxing. There's just one guy that you just cannot get past. Mike Tyson's was Evander Holyfield. Renan Barros was TJ Dillashaw. You have BJ Penn. His was George St. Pierre. You know, there's been cases of that all throughout the history. Obviously, the one that comes to mind is Holly Holm and Ronda Rousey. Obviously, another one that comes to mind is Ali and Frazier. That's the most obvious one. But realistically, Jones is the kryptonite to DC. I know Jones has definitely, missed out on some fighting time due to the fact that he hasn't been fighting for the last couple years. But I really, realistically think that will not matter. John Jones is just too savvy of a fighter, far too skilled for Daniel Cormier. And I'm going to go with John Jones in that fight for those reasons. The co-main event, Tyron Woodley versus Damian Maia, I'm going with Damian Maia. Because last fight with Tyron Woodley versus Wonderboy Thompson, he wasn't really willing to let his hands go. And if he fights stagnant like that versus Damian Maia, Maia will ride him, like a backpack, pretty much, like he did to Jorge Masvidal. And Maia, once you're tangled in that web with him, it's very tough to get out. He's a very tricky guy. I'm going to go with Damian Maia, seizing his moment, taking on this opportunity, and really setting himself up with a super fight with George St. Pierre sometime in November or December. And then obviously Robbie Lawler versus Donald Cerrone. I got Lawler. That's how I see it going down. I'm really excited for UFC 214. Really, that is probably the best card of the year thus far for the sport of mixed martial arts. UFC 213 is not too shabby as well, but I think that obviously UFC 214 is stacked. It's even more stacked now with the 3 title fights, with the featherweight women's title fight, the men's welterweight title fight, and obviously the light heavyweight title fight between John Jones and Daniel Cormier. Then you throw in the Jimmy Manawa fight with Alexei Olin. I can't even pronounce his name. I'll butcher it. But I'm very excited for that as well. That is a fight that will definitely bode well for the UFC's light heavyweight division. It'll kind of clear the picture a little bit as far as who is the real contender. Who are the real contenders outside of Jones, DC, and Gustafsson? So we'll wait and see. But I'm very excited for that fight. Really hope you guys enjoyed the video. I've enjoyed posting these. I had this channel. It was actually way back, but I deleted it and kind of started doing stuff with the podcast, but I recreated it, re-added it, and it's been a lot of fun kind of showing my face and interacting with people via the comments section below. You can tune into my podcast, the Thomas Take Sports Podcast, on Spreaker.com or obviously on the YouTube channel. Thank you so much for joining me the last few years on the Thomas Take, and thank you guys, the newbies, the new listeners that have joined my show since the last video for UFC 213, my UFC 213 prediction. This is my UFC 214 prediction. And if you want to check out the latest episodes of the Thomas Take Sports Podcast, audio only, not video, where you can hear my voice over the mic. I talked about Manny Pacquiao, Jeff Horn, and the debacle that was that fight in terms of the judging and things like that. So tune in and take care. I'm Ryan Thomas from Buffalo, New York. Thank you for tuning in. That was the Thomas Take.